Welcome to the Death Zone channel. This is where we step into true stories together, where battleships, pirates, and explorers face their ultimate moments of life and death. If you love history and crave dramatic yet authentic tales, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you won't miss any upcoming journeys with the Death Zone. We do not condone violence nor idolize anyone. We simply aim to look back at the past honestly and humanely, to understand the choices humans made and the price they paid during moments of extreme tension. Today, join me as we travel back in time to a dark night off the coast of South America, where a pirate raid shook the very foundations of the Spanish Empire's treasure routes. Cold winds sweep across the Pacific. The water is so pitch black that the horizon is barely distinguishable. An English ship drifts silently. Its lights are dimmed, and its sails are taut, yet it moves slower than usual. On deck, the sailors are silent. Only the sound of waves and creaking wood beneath the hull remains. They are pretending to be a harmless merchant vessel, but every eye is fixed on the distance, where the silhouette of a massive ship is rising under the starlight. It is a heavy Spanish galleon, its hold stacked with silver and gold, leisurely sailing a route its crew believes to be absolutely safe, with no enemies lurking. Standing at the bow, the English captain stares intently at that ship. Just one command: the first cannon will fire, and from that moment, there is no turning back for either side. Either they capture the treasure ship, or they vanish into this strange, vast ocean, never to return to England. How dares an English ship infiltrate the backyard of the Spanish Empire and recklessly hunt down such a massive treasure galleon? That story began years earlier, with a man named Francis Drake, and a plan so audacious it seemed impossible to execute. Many years before that dark night, the world map looked very different. On the high seas, the name mentioned most often was not England nor the Netherlands, but Spain. From their conquests in the Americas, they brought back countless amounts of gold, gemstones, and silver ingots mined from the Andes, from lands that once belonged to the vast Inca Empire. All that wealth was gathered, packed into heavy wooden chests, and then loaded onto massive ships bearing white sails and the flying Spanish flag. Those ships sailed on routes that were almost fixed. From ports on the western coast of South America, treasure was transported north to Panama, crossing the isthmus, and then loaded onto other ships to continue the journey to Europe. For the Spanish, the Pacific Ocean, especially the waters along the coast of South America, was like their own private pond. They believed no enemy was reckless enough or capable enough to sneak in here to attack. That very confidence made them lower their guard in the most dangerous way possible. On the other side of the ocean, England was facing an uncomfortable reality. They saw the gold and silver Spain brought back. They saw new cities rising thanks to colonial wealth. But they had arrived late. They did not have much land in the New World, nor had they captured giant silver or gold mines. Therefore, alongside official expeditions, a special class of sailors and captains emerged. Men who were explorers, merchants, and at the same time, raiders of their rivals' maritime routes. Francis Drake was one of them. He was born into an ordinary family, grew up by the seaside, and was accustomed to the wind and waves from an early age. Drake was not a nobleman born with a title, but the kind of man who climbed up with his own hands, through dangerous voyages. He had participated in many journeys along the American coast, witnessing Spanish ships carrying silver and gold pass by, untouched by anyone. In the eyes of many Spaniards, Drake was a nuisance, even an enemy. But in the eyes of many Englishmen, he was the man who dared to do things the royal courts were still hesitating to do. The British royal family never publicly declared "go rob treasure," but they turned a blind eye, or even indirectly supported voyages aimed at putting economic pressure on Spain. That was the context for the birth of voyages that were part exploration, part raiding. Just like the journey targeting the ship Cacafuego we are mentioning, When preparing for his circumnavigation of the globe, Drake carried with him not just the ambition to redraw new coastlines on the map, he also carried another goal: to strike at places Spain thought were inviolable. To do that, he had to accept leaving familiar routes, circling down to the south, finding a way to cross straits full of storms and hidden reefs, to sneak into the other side of the South American continent. Just the act of crossing the swirling waters, fierce winds, and dense fog at the southern tip of the Americas was enough to discourage many sailors. Ships had been wrecked there. Fleets had been separated, losing contact forever. But Drake understood that if he followed the safe routes everyone knew, he would remain forever outside the protective shell of the Spanish Empire. To touch the true treasure route, he had to appear where his opponent least expected. On the Spanish side, those planning the transport of treasure from South America to Europe were confident in their port systems, routes, and armed forces. They knew there were pirates in the Caribbean. They knew there were stalkers in the Atlantic. But few thought that on the far side, on the vast Pacific, an English-flagged ship was silently moving. In their minds, it was a closed sea, protected by the long coast of South America where few strangers set foot. And that very belief created a loophole. When giant galleons were loaded with silver, gold, silk, spices, and all sorts of other precious goods, they left port in a rather calm atmosphere. The sailors knew the voyage was full of risks from storms and disease, but few thought of being ambushed right on the way. Captains were used to dealing with wind, currents, and technical failures, rather than facing an opponent who deliberately hunted them from afar. In that context, rumors of a special treasure ship, carrying a larger amount of silver than usual, began to spread along South American ports. That was the ship people called by the name Cacafuego, a nickname that sounded both strange and evocative of a fire-breathing monster on the sea. For the Spanish, it was just a link in the treasure transport chain. But for Francis Drake, it was the target he had been waiting for. A large prey, sailing alone on a route it believed to be absolutely safe. From here, the game was no longer just about exploration or testing. It became a clearly calculated plan. Find the Cacafuego's schedule, stalk it from behind, and wait for the right moment to strike. And to understand how Drake did that, we need to go deeper into the South American treasure route, into how information, news, and even rumors reached the ears of an English captain who was on the other side of the ocean. When Drake's ship appeared on the western coast of South America, he was essentially stepping onto a stage already set. Small ports along the coast were accustomed to the sight of Spanish galleons coming and going with the seasons, carrying silver from deep within the continent out to sea, then heading north. What Drake needed was not to destroy a major port or challenge an entire fleet, but to seize the exact moment a solitary treasure ship left port and hugged the coastline, where it was least protected. To do that, he started with smaller, less conspicuous targets. Mid-sized merchant vessels, ships carrying cargo, provisions, and sometimes passengers, became valuable sources of information. When such a ship was intercepted at sea, the scene was not always one of fierce combat. Often, just a few warning shots, combined with the sight of a well-equipped ship closing in from a vantage point, were enough for the opposing captain to understand that resistance would only make matters worse. After forcing the opponent to stop, Drake sent men over to inspect the cargo and papers, then spoke with the captain. Instead of just ransacking for gold and silver, he was particularly interested in something else: news. He wanted to know which ships had recently departed, where they were heading, what they were carrying, their time of departure, and their direction. Details that seemed very ordinary when told by the captains, when pieced together, gradually painted a picture of the active treasure route. Not every interception yielded useful information. Sometimes they only encountered small vessels carrying necessities for coastal settlements. Sometimes, those on board simply shook their heads, saying they knew nothing of the silver shipments. Each time this happened, time drifted by, the wind shifted, and the risk of letting the main target slip away grew larger. On the deck of the Golden Hind, not everyone was comfortable drifting in strange waters, hunting a ship they had never seen. But then, from scattered clues, the name Cacafuego began to appear more frequently. One captain recounted seeing it leave a port in Peru, masts stacked with cargo, moving heavily toward the north. Another spoke of an unusually large amount of silver loaded onto the ship, enough to make anyone's eyes widen. Someone even joked that just a small fraction of the silver on that ship would be enough for Drake's entire crew to live in peace for the rest of their lives. For Drake, those rumors were not merely boasts. Every chest of silver, every heavy ingot mentioned, meant his voyage around the world could end in glory, rather than in silence. But he understood that to touch the treasure, he first had to close the distance with a ship that was days ahead of him. On a sea route, the enemy believed to be completely safe. From this point, the hunt entered a new phase. The Golden Hind no longer followed a random course, but began to track the points Cacafuego was forced to pass. Along the way, Drake had the ship stop at small bays, where there were fishing villages or supply stations, to ask for more news. Every time they made landfall, the risk of being discovered and reported to Spanish authorities increased. But without doing so, he would never know how far he was from his prey. The rhythm of life on the ship changed visibly. By day, the sailors strained to unfurl the sails to cut the distance, utilizing every favorable breeze and every current pushing from behind. By night, they took turns standing watch, trying to spot any speck of light on the horizon that might be the lamp of another ship. The monotonous waves, cold winds, and sudden rains made fatigue evident on every face, but no one dared to be negligent. Occasionally, unfavorable news dampened the ship's spirits. Once, a fisherman said he had seen a large galleon pass by days ago, heading north. That meant the prey had pulled further ahead, forcing the Golden Hind to accelerate if they didn't want to miss out. There were nights when Drake stood alone at the bow, staring into the darkness, wondering if the decision to enter these waters was a mistake. But each time, he thought of what was being carried on the deck of the Cacafuego, and how, if successful, England would have powerful proof that their rival was no longer invulnerable. Beyond the material element, something else drove Drake. If an English captain could traverse waters Spain considered absolutely safe and strike at their most important treasure route, the message sent back to Europe would be very clear. It was not just about money, but an assertion that the balance of power at sea was beginning to shift. For a rising nation like England, that significance was no less important than any chest of silver. Over time, the small signals appeared more frequently. At one port, they heard the Cacafuego had left later than expected to wait for a full load. Elsewhere, someone said they saw the ship moving slower than usual because it was heavily laden. These seemingly trivial details, when connected, pointed to one thing. The distance between the Golden Hind and the Cacafuego was gradually shrinking, though no one on Drake's ship could say for sure how far away they were. Until one afternoon, as the light slanted across the sea surface, a sailor on the mast suddenly shouted the signal. On the horizon, he saw the silhouette of a large ship, with tall masts and a massive frame distinct from the small merchant vessels usually encountered. Drake immediately adjusted course, keeping a distance far enough to avoid attention but close enough not to lose the trail. The hunt that had lasted for weeks was suddenly compressed into a single breath. From here, every step had to be carefully calculated. If they approached too fast, the prey might get alerted and try to flee, or signal nearby Spanish outposts. If they kept too much distance, just a thick bank of fog would be enough for the two ships to lose each other forever. Drake ordered strict discipline, rechecking the cannons, weapons, and even small details like anchor ropes and the oars of the small boats. He knew the decisive moment was approaching, and when it arrived, any error could cost them the entire ship. Night gradually fell over the South American Sea. Ahead, the Cacafuego continued its journey, believing this was just a trip like so many others before. Behind, the Golden Hind drifted silently, like a shadow, both patient and dangerous. Between the two ships lay a stretch of darkness that seemed peaceful, but with just a single command, that darkness would instantly turn into a battleground. And at that moment, no one on those ships suspected they were standing right on the verge of a pirate raid that would be retold for centuries to come. That night, Drake decided the time had come to break the silent darkness between the two ships. After hours of trailing at a safe distance, he called his close officers to the deck, pointing forward to where the blurred lanterns of the Cacafuego were swaying on the horizon. The wind had calmed, the waves were not too high, and the sky was dark enough to conceal their intent. Yet there was just enough starlight for the gunners to see their target. This was the exact condition Drake had been waiting for. He ordered almost all lights on the Golden Hind extinguished, keeping only a few dim lamps lit, mimicking the ordinary working lights of a merchant vessel traveling through the night. On deck, the sailors moved swiftly, rechecking anchor lines and rigging, swabbing the cannon barrels, and loading the ammunition. But everything had to be done in silence, exchanging only brief, hushed commands. No one wanted a single unusual sound to alert the Cacafuego. The Golden Hind began to pick up speed, just enough to close the gap, yet maintaining the appearance of drifting with the wind. In the darkness, seen from afar, she looked like nothing more than a fellow traveler, coincidentally sharing the same route. When the distance drew closer, Drake hoisted light signals similar to those used by friendly ships on the shipping lane as a casual greeting. To the Spanish sailors on the Cacafuego, what lay before them was merely an unknown but seemingly harmless vessel, appearing in waters they believed had been cleared of all danger. There was no enemy naval flag, no battle formation, just a solitary ship shadow moving in the night. They had no idea that on that ship, every cannon was primed and ready. When Drake saw the range was close enough for his guns to hit critical points, he ordered a slight change in course, cutting across the Cacafuego's bow. That maneuver forced the Spanish ship to pay attention, for any collision between two heavy hulls laden with cargo would be dangerous. The Cacafuego began signaling, demanding the ship ahead adjust its course. The sailors on the Golden Hind remained silent, only adjusting the sails to slow the ship's rotation, as if their captain was confused or slow to react in the dark. The decisive moment arrived when the two ships were separated by only a short distance, close enough to clearly see the masts, rigging, and parts of the deck under the yellow lantern light of the Cacafuego. Drake lowered his voice, issuing a clear order to the gunners. Do not fire into the main hold. Do not aim directly at the captain, but target the points that would disable the ship's movement. His goal was not destruction, but to force a halt with the cargo intact on the deck. The order was passed, and the gunners gripped their lanyards tight. A moment of absolute silence enveloped the Golden Hind. Then, a sharp command rang out, and the first volley tore through the night. Muzzle flashes erupted, reflecting off the black water, the thunderous sound echoing through the void, shaking both vessels. The cannonballs flew across the short distance, smashing directly into the mast, the rigging, and the stern of the Spanish ship. On the Cacafuego, the tranquility of a routine voyage vanished in an instant. The rear mast shuddered violently and then collapsed. Rigging snapped, and torn sails crashed onto the deck. The ship, already heavy with its full load, became even harder to maneuver. Sailors rushed to find their stations, trying to assess the damage and salvage what they could. Shouts in Spanish rang out urgently, mixed with the sounds of splintering wood and ropes whipping against the masts. The Golden Hind did not continue an indiscriminate bombardment. After the first volley, Drake ordered a reduction in speed, holding a position alongside the Cacafuego, where his cannons could still threaten but would not destroy the ship's main structure. He signaled a demand for the Spanish ship to stop and lower its sails, or else face further fire. It was a clear choice: accept surrender to negotiate, or risk being crippled further in the open ocean. The captain of the Cacafuego quickly realized his disadvantage. His ship was heavy, laden with silver, and not configured as a professional warship. They were mentally unprepared for a confrontation, especially against an opponent who had clearly secured the tactical advantage. A few more volleys aimed at the sails and upper hull would be enough to rob the ship of any ability to navigate the long voyage. Under those circumstances, his priority was not to rush into a desperate fight, but to keep the lives of his crew and the cargo as intact as possible. It did not take long for the signal accepting the halt to be given. The Cacafuego slowed, adjusting its heading, trying to stabilize after the impact of the cannon fire. The Golden Hind drew closer, still keeping just enough distance to avoid a hull collision that could damage herself. In the flickering yellow light, the English sailors prepared the skiffs, carrying armed boarding parties over to the Spanish ship. The weapons they carried were not to incite a bloody melee, but to clearly assert who was now in control of the situation. When the first English boots stepped onto the deck of the Cacafuego, the atmosphere on the treasure ship was heavy. Sealed chests lay silent under the planking. Storage rooms deep in the ship's belly were filled with silver bars and coins. The Spanish sailors understood they were facing a reality difficult to accept. The ship they believed safe, on a route they believed secret, had been intercepted in the middle of the ocean by a vessel from the other side of the world. Drake did not turn that moment into one of revenge or punishment. He ordered the disarmament of the Spanish crew, gathering them in a specific area of the ship, guarded but orderly. Then, he began the most critical part of the plan: the inventory and transfer of the treasure. Hatch covers were thrown open, and lantern lights spilled down, catching the glimmer of stacked silver bars, bags of coins, and sacks of precious goods. In the days that followed, the two ships anchored near a remote stretch of coast, far from the main shipping lanes to reduce the risk of detection. The offloading of the treasure could not be done in a rush. Everything had to be orderly, recorded, and categorized, for the weight on each ship had to be carefully calculated. The sailors of the Golden Hind took turns hauling, moving crate after crate of silver, chest after chest from the Cacafuego to their own ship. For many of them, this was the first time in their lives they had seen such a massive amount of precious metal. Every night, after the day's unloading ended, Drake continued to enforce a strict watch, always preparing for the possibility of a strange ship appearing. Even with the upper hand, he knew that a sudden appearance by a small Spanish squadron could reverse their fortunes instantly. Therefore, alongside the joy of the captured treasure, a quiet tension remained, as if both ships were standing in a zone where a single small mistake could turn it into a battlefield. When the unloading was nearly complete, Drake did something that surprised many on both ships. He invited the captain and several Spanish officers to dine on the Golden Hind, treating them with relative politeness, like reluctant guests. Afterward, he returned their ship to them, stripped of most of its silver but still seaworthy, so they could return to report to their superiors. This action showed both confidence and sent a clear message. This was not a senseless act of destruction, but a precise strike against the treasure transport route. As the sails of the Golden Hind filled once more, the ship began to leave the anchorage, carrying the massive weight of silver and goods just acquired. Behind them, the Cacafuego remained, now riding much higher in the water, left with a story its sailors would likely retell for years to come. On the deck of the English ship, the sea breeze still blew, and waves still lapped against the hull. But for those present, everything had changed. They knew they had just witnessed one of the most audacious and significant acts of piracy history had ever recorded. And though no one yet fully understood the long-term consequences of this event, all could feel that, from the moment the Cacafuego was intercepted in the black of night, the order of the South American seas would never be the same again. As the Golden Hind moved far from the coast where the two ships had once anchored, the treasure on deck weighed the ship down, yet no one truly felt relieved. Every sailor understood they had just touched the silver transport line of the wealthiest empire of the time, right in waters the rival believed no one dared appear. The excitement was mixed with the sensation of an invisible pursuit. They were still half a world away from home, and behind them lay an entire dynasty with ample reason to hunt down the one who had taken their wealth. For Drake, the moment the cannons fired was merely the beginning. He knew that from this point forward, every wave could carry a risk. In the days and weeks that followed, Drake did not allow himself to sink into a feeling of victory. He decided not to return via the familiar route across the Atlantic, where Spain possessed many ports and fleets. Instead, the Golden Hind continued to skirt along waters rarely mentioned on European maps, finding a way to circle back west to complete a journey almost entirely around the globe. With every change, of course, every avoidance of a strange fleet or an unfamiliar coastline, the entire ship stood on a fragile boundary between returning in glory and vanishing forever at sea. Seizing the treasure was one thing. Keeping it amidst the ocean was the true challenge. When the Golden Hind finally docked in England, the story of the ship and the treasure it carried traveled faster than any wind offshore. The silver bars, coins, and precious goods confiscated from the Cacafuego were inventoried. Shares were divided among the investors, and a large portion belonged to the crown. That wealth became a concrete resource, helping England invest further in its fleet, in new voyages, and in the ambition to compete at sea. Francis Drake, from a captain of ordinary origin, became a famous figure across Europe. Some called him a hero, some viewed him as a state-sponsored pirate, but no one denied that the interception of the Cacafuego proved the South American treasure route was no longer inviolable. On the other side, news of the robbery naturally caused a shock. A silver ship had been intercepted right on the route considered safest by a rival from a rising nation. That was not just a material loss, but a blow to the image and the belief that their power at sea was absolute. In the following years, tension between England and Spain increased, contributing to the fleet confrontations that history books later recount. The Cacafuego affair, therefore, was not just an audacious raid, but one of the signals showing the balance of power at sea was beginning to tilt. Looking beyond the chests of silver, the Cacafuego story reminds us that treasure on the sea does not spawn amidst the waves. It comes from silver mines, gold mines, from the labor and the disrupted lives of communities on distant continents. An interception at sea is thus not just a story between two ships, two flags, but a piece in a larger picture of ambition, competition, and the price that many nameless people had to pay. Today, when recounting the chase and capture of the Cacafuego, we do not need to glorify violence or view it as a romantic adventure. Instead, we look at it as a slice of maritime history, where bold decisions, subjective errors, and political and economic choices met on the water's surface. And that is also the reason stories like this appear on the Death Zone channel. Not to praise war or plunder, but so we understand better the moments where history pivoted amidst the waves and humans had to make difficult choices. If you want to continue accompanying such journeys, from distant bays to battlefields rarely mentioned, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and leave your thoughts below. The sea still holds many stories, and each story possesses a borderline where mistake, ambition, and courage meet in moments of no return.